And take it away, Cammie.
All right, thank you, Jamie, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. As Jamie said, my name is Cammie Farruggio. I am a second-year PhD student at MIT. And today I'm going to be talking about how to sell yourself as a strong graduate student applicant, or how to make sure you and app readers are on the same page about how awesome you are. So I know if you're attending this, you've probably done a lot of thinking about grad school apps already. I think Lance Cooper probably told you about the format for grad school applications and the expectations, and Celia is going to do a far better job than I ever could of telling you about the specifics of your personal statement. So my goal today is to talk more high level about how to take the information that you've collected through doing good research, being involved in lots of things, all these things that you know about yourself that make you a good applicant, and putting those together in a way that will make sure that your app reader is on the same page with you about how eligible you are to be a PhD candidate. So a little quick disclaimer before we get started. I am one grad student with some application experience. I am by no means the authority on these topics, but these are the things that have helped me in the past, and that I think are a useful way to frame the process of promoting yourself and writing an application that shows your achievements in a way that also demonstrates your ability to be a good graduate student. So I'm aiming to have some general advice, but always read the instructions on the specific application of wherever you're applying to, because they do change a little bit between institutions. So a little bit about me before we get started. I graduated from UIUC in the spring of 2019. That text is very dark, apologies. So I am an alum of the University of Illinois. And I was also a SWIP officer from 2016 to 2019. I really enjoyed helping organize events like apple picking, which I've been nostalgic for in recent days for obvious reasons, and naturally involving the corn maze because it's Illinois and there needs to be corn, as well as several other events. So I was the SWIP president and now am back talking again. I was also involved in science outreach while at UIUC, so FizVan, Engineering Open House. One year I actually got to build my own electric violin, and I liked the way it looks, but it ended up being super heavy. I studied engineering, physics, and French and graduated with a dual degree in my undergrad. This let me go to lots of exciting, exotic places like Paris and Iowa for the undergraduate women in physics conference. That's actually SWIP right there. This is our 2018 photo. But all kidding aside, I actually, after realizing that I really did like both travel and being in cities while doing my study abroad for the French degree, I realized that I really like those things, and also got to go travel abroad for physics related things as well. So I kind of had this interesting meandering research path that converged materials science. My first summer doing research, I was actually working on mostly computational analysis of solar farm performance with the solar farm on campus. And then from that, because of the needs of the industry, I was kind of inspired to get involved with lithium ion battery development. So I was doing some combination of material science and mechanics testing. So I would do these load testing of cells. And then ultimately that kind of got me into the nitty gritty of the material science of electrolyte design and characterization. And I ultimately ended up working on this project, doing some materials design, doing some performance testing, characterization of these samples that I was actually designing and making myself. And I got to do, these fun things, like occasionally I would just need to use a giant saw to cut a very small sample, which makes for some very nice time-lapse videos. And now I am a PhD student at MIT in materials science. I work in the Van Vliet group for material chemomechanics. This is us at our socially distant picnic earlier this year. And I work on cell therapy manufacturing technologies, so growing things like these cells right here. These are human stem cells, and figuring out how we can change the material systems they live in to make them grow more uniformly, be the same type of cells by the time we're giving them to patients, and make them do their job better. So I'm happy to answer questions on any of that if anyone would like to ask them at the end, but that is not currently what we're talking about today. So we're talking about how to take all of these things about my past and about your past and turn them into a graduate application. A few more things about me just in the current day. I currently enjoy apple picking, though sadly with less corn than in Illinois, here in Massachusetts. Hiking in the White Mountains, baking and material science outreach through food science demos, managing not to kill the plants in my room. And I've also been relaxing by watching Love Island with my roommates, in between keeping up with the 2020 election, because you really need something to balance that out. And, you know, when you're thinking about how to, convince someone who's reading a grad school app that you are the best choice for a certain position, my recent consumption of media has really had me thinking about how do you convince someone you're the best choice for anything? And whether you're talking about, reality TV romances, political candidacy, or your grad school apps, you need to be considering what your audience is looking for. So you've probably heard some version of this before. Essentially what readers are looking for that makes a good candidate are candidates who would be a good addition to the graduate community, a good investment of the department's time. So somebody who is going to stick with the program, somebody who is hopefully going to take the knowledge and the skills that they attain and go forward and be active members of this field. And students who are going to be a good investment of that program's time, money, and resources. So students who are going to turn around and produce good work, and essentially students who are ultimately going to produce knowledge. So people who are going to get publications and also advance the field in general. So whether you're applying to physics or you're applying to things outside of physics, these are all generally true. So you'll see a lot of lists from many different people on what specifically this means for things you should be underlining as an applicant to graduate school. But for me, I think it's easiest to break down into the two stories that you should ideally be telling about yourself in applications. So at the end of the day, you should really be making sure that you have a solid version of these two stories about yourself. The first is about how motivated you are as a student and as a student for this program. So in general, are you a self-starter? Are you someone who's going to come in and do the work and be excited about doing this work? What motivates you to work in this field? Are you going to stick with this field in the long term? Have you put thought into making sure that this is what you want to do when they're admitting you, and they're admitting you for 4, 5, 6, 7 years? Are you someone who has done the thinking to know that you really want to be here for that amount of time? So showing them that you've done that, and also showing them that you're motivated to be pursuing this work at this institution. They want to feel that people who are being admitted there are people who specifically want to be there. So they're admitting you to this community and you're excited to be there. The other story is the story of how skilled you are. So obviously you hear a lot about this is your research experience, but also things like your writing and technical skills and your social and soft skills. So when approaching, telling them where your interest for this field comes from, how you got here, I like to think about this as drawing a map for them of how this is the logical destination for your career. So for me, my path was a little bit meandering. I went from engineering physics and I took this detour into French studies, and then I went into battery research and I went to Japan. And ultimately I ended up deciding that I wanted to be doing material science research on live cells. So your job as the application writer is to kind of draw them this path between these events and say, here is, what led me to this point. And it actually makes complete sense that I have made this transition and that all these things have led up to this point, and here's why. So the way to do this, and the way that you want to be thinking about crafting this story as you draft your personal statement, as you think about, how you want to frame your interests and your credentials, is to find constants and common themes in your interests and pursuits. So things like what common interests and goals lie behind the areas that you've studied in the past. And also incorporating things that you did outside of classes. Are there common values or things that you found fulfilling in your extracurriculars and hobbies? How can you pull those out and show them that these are also things that underlie what you want to do in the future? Also in the course of telling this story of how your undergraduate career has led you, continuously to this point, perhaps, is to talk about lessons you learned along the way, what drove you from point A to point B. So say from one summer research experience to the classes you took the next year or the next research experience you did, basically showing them that the place that you've arrived at and the fact that you want to be applying here at this time is the result of having had these experiences and the fact that you have been converging to this for a while, that it's a well thought out decision. So I know that I personally was not entirely sure what I actually wanted to do when I was applying to grad schools. And I think that's not entirely uncommon. You don't need to argue necessarily that this is the only path for you. You just need to build an argument that it is the best. You need to show that you have put in thought to say, I'm not just applying to grad school because, I don't know what other job I want to have. You're saying I'm applying to graduate school in this field because it makes sense. And here are all the things that show that it makes sense. And I think it's the best path for me. Any questions so far? Feel free to ask me about anything. We're a small group today. Okay, great. So just as an example of how to do this, I'm just kind of pulling quotes from things that I have written in the past, but I'm sure you can apply it to your own experience as well. So here I was making a kind of big leap, and I was arguing that it made sense naturally that my physics and French majors indicated that I should definitely be going for a PhD in material science. And so I essentially had talked about why I found both of these degrees interesting, that connection between understanding the specifics and small scale understanding of how things like language or material systems work, and looking at how that affects large scale properties or histories of the culture. So essentially, if you're able to look at maybe disparate stories you have of research experiences or disparate stories you have of accomplishments that you've had, if you're able to draw connections underlying your past and your future studies, show the relevance of your experience to proof of your interest in your future work, then you're able to demonstrate that you're ready to dedicate years to your work because you've demonstrated your demonstrated commitment in past pursuits stems from the same interests and foundational values as your interest in the things that you're arguing you want to be doing in future. So my other advice for using this storyline to write your good application, to write a good personal statement, is to make use of the way you've mapped this out to write a really great opener. And in my experience, one of the best ways to do that is to focus on some catalyzing moment when you realized what pursuit, you realized this pursuit filled the things you've learned and liked to this point. And so this is the kind of map you want to be drawing for your app readers when you tell them the story of all of your work in undergrad to this point. But in reality, what it actually probably looks like is more like this, where you had a lot of little moments of realization and you corrected for them along the way. True epiphany is actually pretty rare, but that means you actually have the freedom to choose one of these moments and choose one that says a lot about who you are as a person and, what story it is that really pulled together. This is what I want to be doing and studying in the future. So I know I certainly spent a lot of time thinking about what thing I could do, what field I could go into that would make sense for my interests. So of all of those, I ended up choosing the story of being in a paper museum in Tokyo. and seeing, all of the different important technological changes that came about just because they figured out how to mass produce paper and how that affected things like art and literacy and societal change. And these 4 sentences, I think I rewrote about 500 times. You don't need to do it quite that many. But I ended up being very, very proud of this opener. And one of the things that I really liked about it was that because it took place at one of these catalyzing moments, I was able to tie in exactly why I wanted to be where I was arguing I wanted to be, and also the places that I had been and some of my interests as well. Also, please make sure, I'm sure you've heard this a lot before, but when you are telling this story, don't get to the end and not say something specific to the school that you're applying to. So it's very, very important that app readers, when reading this, aren't thinking you could have applied anywhere, and mentioning specifics about the school that made you want to be a part of that particular program show that you did your research, you're diligent, and you made decisions for a reason. You're not just throwing this application at them in the hopes that, to get lots of admissions. And which I know sounds silly, but they like to feel appreciated when they're reading. It also shows that you're informed enough about their program to be convinced that your values and needs align with their values and resources. Because programs can vary in things like course structure, they can vary in things like the particular subfields that they're particularly good at. They can vary in the way that you do things like qualifying exams or their connections to industry, this kind of thing. And so showing them that you have really looked specifically at what their department is good at and the way that they work goes a long way towards convincing them that their values and resources are aligned with your values and needs as well, and that they want you to be there because you would be a good fit for their department. So a good place to start is just the front page of whatever department whose program you're applying to. Look at their history, value and mission statements, department programs, course structures, any points of pride they have. Usually programs will have 1 or 2 bragging points about their rotation system or the way that they do their core classes. And just make sure if that's something that appeals to you, to mention that it appeals to you in your application. And essentially, just in this section in general, when you're talking about why you're motivated to be a graduate student in this field, in this program, you want to dedicate years to this. You already have your reasons. You've already chosen after all the experience that have led you to this point. Your job is just to tell them why and make sure you're doing good enough storytelling that they understand and they're convinced that this is actually your motivation moving forward. As far as demonstrating that you have the research skills, my main point here is just to make sure that you have demonstrated all of the skills that you do have. So if anyone remembers the Bloom's taxonomy from those K through 12 days, I think I saw this several times in middle school. It was actually kind of a useful structure for me, just making sure that I had talked about all of these things in the course of my application, between my research statements, personal statements, my resume, because you want to make sure when you're talking about past research experience, you're specific about what you did in the course of your projects. What were your contributions? Were you running experiments and kind of doing some of the hands-on work? Were you making graphs and building tools and techniques? Were you analyzing the data and drawing conclusions from it and finding ways to look at the data in new ways? Or did you actually get the chance to pose a novel research question and design your own experiments? And so all of these skills are valuable, but you want to make sure it's good to specify what role you did play in helping to produce that paper and presentation, not only because you'll find yourself saying more quality things about your experiences and what you gained from them, but it will also help you talk about the specifics of what you got out of it, the skills that you applied. And every single one of these is valuable. Just because some of them are lower on the pyramid, it doesn't mean that you're not getting valuable skills like data recording and organizational skills, hands-on experience, and skills collaborating with lab mates. All of these things that anyone who's done research knows. You really do learn from doing research that prepare you to move to other labs that are very transferable skills. Also, if you've worked in a lab even a little bit, that's when you start getting these very academia specific experiences like weird lab humor and understanding about yourself exactly how long you'll be amused by things like calipers with googly eyes. The answer for me was about 10 solid minutes. But it's also important to know what your research covers as far as this is concerned, so that you can see where extracurriculars and activities need to cover the rest. So maybe the bulk of your undergraduate work doing research was, running experiments, making graphs, building tools and techniques, and maybe you did some analysis, but a lot of the time you're not doing this kind of higher level posing research questions and design experiments. And if you did, I'm jealous, because I don't think I ever had that high level control of a project in my undergrad. So some things you can do include presentations. This is showing communication and composition skills, especially if you don't have full papers published. It shows that you actually got to the point of producing results enough to pull them together into something that was presentable and had a conclusion. You were able to understand and answer questions. You had presentation communication skills, and posters are citable. Illinois actually gives you resources to archive these and have them available online. This is one of my results. When you search me on Google now, I have this value on the economic value of solar photovoltaic electricity in the US Midwest. If you're curious about my solar project on solar PV value. So this is one way to include, more of those writing skills if you don't necessarily have publications out. But the other way is to not discount the relevant skills from the rest of your resume. So you can show off some of those high-level planning and execution skills in other areas if you don't have them specifically in research. So things like leadership experience. So like I said, I was the president of SWIP. I did mention that in my application. My study abroad in France was more important for grad school life skills than just contemplating my mortality. It was also good for, navigating foreign environments, working with groups, organizing logistics, doing research abroad. No matter what your role in research was, any science in a new environment, whether that was in an RU in the country and you moved to a different state, or if you had the chance to go abroad, doing any kind of research in a new environment shows that you're resilient in the face of change and challenge. And if you were the lead on any projects or a part of any projects and you contributed to things like Engineers Without Borders, any volunteer work, something where you were producing results, being resilient in the face of failure, like utilizing time management, all of these are worth mentioning. So understanding which of these you can cover talking about your research and which of these you should maybe lean into talking about more with other things in your application is just something you should consider to make sure you have convinced them that you are indeed the full package with everything you've talked about. And so presenting these things for best effect, just like if you're preparing a resume or anything else, with your research experience, you want to talk about specifics of the things you did. So, how many people were in the group you led, what specific achievements you accomplished. So did you actually take a lot of raw data and produce legible graphs from it? Did you, have this open question and then you design an experiment and executed it? What results did you get? How far did you get? Did you do a poster presentation at the end? Talk about what skills you gained. If you picked up technical skills or if there's equipment you used, you can talk about that. If you feel like you learned lessons about collaborating or you got leadership skills, you can mention that. And also lessons you learned. So because you're fitting this in the larger narrative of here is the work I've done to this point, here is my research experience, you can talk about your key takeaways and how this experience shaped your next steps. And so just for another example, here is an excerpt of a description of a research project that didn't even involve that many technical skills. So I essentially ended up talking about, I refined my skills filtering and reading academic papers. I applied coding skills and had contact with professionals in the industry. And then I was able to produce value analyses. Here's what they did. and I presented these results in these spaces. And so even a description this short, if you can include all of those things, ends up being a pretty complete description of what they want to know about your research experience. So why was it important to you? And what does it demonstrate about your ability to produce knowledge? So any research you've done is important. Just make sure to tell them how impactful it was to you or to science or to the world, or all three. And finally, I'm sure you have heard this one before, but when you are talking about your technical skills, one of your largest assets in your application is also going to be strong letters of recommendation. So just a few tips. Ideally, your letter writers should be academics is great. If you should have at least one recommender who is an academic, just because then it is from peer to peer. The people reading your application will be academics, and they'll know what specifically to write about that they will be looking for. Preferably their supervisors, someone who can speak to the above mentioned traits and skills, who are seeing what you are producing. Mentors, if possible, someone who actually knows your strengths and thought processes, as well as your results and successes. Someone who can speak to things like, you speak to things like your leadership skills or your attitude in the lab. How eager were you to be in the lab every day? What kind of worker were you like? That kind of thing. And they should be warned as soon as possible, because a stressed or frustrated recommender who got asked to write a letter 5 days before the deadline is probably not going to be at their most complimentary. And so finally, also convincing them that you have the skills to be a great researcher. Academic success helps, but it isn't central. They look at academic success. It's important for graduate students because it can be a sign of your organization and diligence and your understanding of the science you'll need to ask the right research question and pursue answers. I am living with a few physicists who are studying for their qualifying exams in physics right now, where you essentially need to become an expert in a specific subfield of physics and know all the things. And the idea there is that if you understand a lot about your fields, then you'll be much better poised to understand what questions need asking and how to approach them best. So these are the reasons that they're looking at academic success, but you can demonstrate these skills elsewhere as well. If you don't feel that your transcript really accurately represents your skills and you've demonstrated these elsewhere, explain why these aren't coming through necessarily in your academic performance, and then you can give evidence of these skills in other areas. So maybe you had an off semester for some reason, but generally speaking, you also have been very organized and diligent in your research outside of class or in your involvement in summer research. And you've demonstrated a deep understanding of science in putting together projects, and you've demonstrated organization in the leadership positions that you've taken on over time. So it is important to the application, but the application is relatively holistic. So depending on the requirements of your institution, this is not the most central or important part of being a successful graduate school applicant. It's all of those things together. So those are my main general pieces of advice on selling yourself as a graduate school applicant. My only last comment is that you are seriously awesome. You are where you are for a reason. You have, you've survived years of undergrad. You've been involved. You've done research. You're at the point where you're looking at applying to grad schools. You are awesome. It's all just about making sure you frame it so that your app readers see that as well. So that's all I have to say. I will leave you with this meme that was central to my first year experience. Welcome to graduate school, where the rules are made up and the points don't matter. If you have any questions, please let me know. I am happy to answer any and all of them. And if you can't think of them now and you have some later, feel free to reach out to me by email. I'm happy to chat about grad school life, MIT specifically, what I do, baking, not killing plants, whatever you like, feel free to reach out. But with that, I'll open it up to questions.
Feel free to unmute yourself or put the questions in the chat and I'll moderate the chat.